Alanna, and myself, Jennifer, are going to be speaking about invisibility and visibility. That is our keyword for this discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I don't know if I do it that way. I can't go sideways, probably. We're experimenting because cameras are not working. Should I start with why I wanted to do it? Okay.
Definitely.
So, this is Jennifer speaking, and I wanted to choose, I suggested invisibility and visibility for a couple of reasons. I think a lot of the readings that we are discussing in class deal with issues of what is visible and what we accept as visible. And also I wanted to bring up the Post-Atomic Eyes seminar that Karen Barad was a part of, and speak to her idea of the cut and how she takes words, compound words, and just, I guess I could look at you guys. Takes compound words and she inserts a slash through them so they're read differently. So with invisibility, it would be written as in/visibility. So it creates something that is visible, and it reminds you that it is visible in visibility. And that's why I wanted to bring that. What do you think?
So I've seen that as a sort of recurring theme in like lots of different theoretical texts, which I think is pretty interesting. I'm reading a book by Josephine Macon, which is synesthetics, and sin is within brackets, which is kind of the same practice. And I think it's a very interesting way in which linguistically, at least visually, you can illustrate how something is two things at once, which I really like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that she sort of put visible and invisible not separately, but actually two facts of the same thing. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea, especially can be applied to our course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just found that, I don't know, my brain has exploded after I started understanding. So I went to the seminar and I went to her talk and I had no idea what she was talking about. By the end of her talk, I was kind of getting it because she brought up the word return.
Yeah.
And she said it's not a going backwards, it's a turning over and over, because she cut return by re/turn. And so it wasn't going to the past, it was turning over. And that idea just completely made me so excited. Really, and I should be doing my hand. And so with the invisibility and visibility and the cut through it, it actually becomes one word in a sense, even though there's two, but yeah. And where was I going? I don't know.
We're talking about visible,
yeah.
invisible.
And just knowing that, and then I read a couple more of her readings, and I just wrote something for my other class. So I think I'm a big Karen Barad fan now, and I think I'm her
That's good.
Because it was just so fascinating. I never thought that I, Jennifer Lorraine Fraser, would actually be able to understand physics. And I probably don't, but I understand taking a small thing and cutting it to make it more nuanced or more opening up of different, a multiplicity of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Okay.
So, did you want to talk to what either of you think?
Yeah, sure. So what I've been connecting this to is I did the Judith Halverson reading, who is now Jack Halverson, who's from the University of California and also from Berkeley, as told to me by Wikipedia. Thanks, Wikipedia. And the concept of visibility and invisibility in terms of naming of binaries, or the act of naming in general. So one of the things that happens when we give something a name, and this is coming back to Aaron Manning, is it exists. It starts to be something that we can deconstruct, and we can talk about, and we can actively and readily think about and have a discourse around. But when we don't name something, it linguistically to us is completely negligent. There's no way that we can talk about something that we don't have words for. And I come back to this point a lot, but we're having this conversation in English. There are words in English that just don't encapsulate a lot of different things that there might be in other languages. And that's one of the really interesting things about theorizing, is that it's so inherently linked to how we end up talking about things. So.
We're saying how we talk about things? What does that mean?
So what we choose to describe or make new words for, rather than simply just sort of skirting around. So the reading that I was doing was mostly inherently about gender.
Yeah.
So in the time period that Jack is illustrating, it's largely about Alan Turing, who was gay, and because of the time period that he lived in, they were like, we need to get your gender all figured out, and we need to make sure that your sexuality is something that we can all understand, and we sort of put in this neat little box, because at the time the British government thought that anyone who was gay was also a communist and also a spy, because history.
Why? There are a lot of guy spies?
So they basically just pumped him full of estrogen, and he ended up committing suicide. And sort of this relationship that not having words to readily describe something, they didn't really have a way of discoursing a healthy relationship to sexuality or to gender, and thus, because there weren't words to describe it in a positive way, it could only be viewed as negative.
Okay. So you were saying it's sort of related to the visibility and invisibility because of the time frame that was?
Yeah, and just sort of the words in which people chose to wrap this around, wrap the issue around.
Yeah. So then the situation changed a lot, since then. Do you think it's still you can still define the problem in that way?
Yes and no. So the interesting thing about the 21st century is that a lot of work has been done in sort of opening up the conversation of sexuality and gender.
Yeah.
So now words like trans is just not viewed as negatively as it is anymore, and there's lots of words for what fluid sexuality is, where it's not just there's heterosexual, homosexual, man and woman, and sort of that binary in which you only have two ways to describe something. There's instead a very large continuum, which I personally decide to view as a circle, in which you can just sort of go all the way from one end and then you meet at the other and then you sort of switch back around. So.
I see. Yeah, it's very interesting. I was working on one of the trans-sex topic when I was in the undergraduate program, and it was even now that's a very sensitive topic now.
Yeah.
So they're a small community and scared to touch the other people.
Not to say that there's inherently not problems right now in the 21st century. It's just that we don't have the fruit machine we saw in class, where it's just
scary.
Yeah. For context for this video, the fruit machine was a machine used by the Canadian government that basically told whether or not someone was gay, so that they could be fired based on pupil dilation and I think heartbeat. It was very Blade Runner-esque.
Yeah.
It's sort of you are this because you have a certain thing, which maybe you want to watch Blade Runner.
Is that basically a lying test?
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of, but to see if you were homosexual or.
Yeah, they basically just showed images of homosexual acts, and then we're you had a relationship with that, or you
It's like
saw it.
in the States that they still do those farms where they try to revert the children
Yeah.
back.
Oh yeah.
Like it still happens.
It's
you
still
know?
happening, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, force them to watch like heterosexual sexual acts and stuff like that, and test their not desire, but their heart rates to say that they, it's really horrible. But yeah.
Returning to visibility
Yeah.
and invisibility from that
Well,
terribly sad place.
Yeah. I'm sorry. So we were talking earlier. So my phone says that it's only going to record, I think, to 13:25, and we're at 11 minutes and 41. So I don't know what's going on.
You can always pause the video and
then record again.
Okay, should I send it maybe? And then put it, and then cut it? Or like, I paused it.
Okay.
Just realized that we haven't really done anything interesting with our feet.
We're just kind of like, and I hope that's still recording. Let me see.
This is a moment of pause, the 11-minute mark.
Let's see. Oh yeah, it's still going.
That's cool.
So that's cool. So if we lose this, we'll still have feet at the end. And I think I want to keep all this discussion in it because it's still talking about invisibility, visibility, and we're kind of play acting this, right? And trying to see what happens in our demeanors while we're talking about these really difficult issues. And how we can, because when speaking with another, maybe we can go back to Manning, it's like the reaching towards, and when we're having this discussion and there's three of us, and I wanted to, maybe I should, record. Maybe I should record. So going back to that, just wanting to, when we talk about such difficult material, and I'm trying to speak and my eyes are going somewhere else, but we're kind of putting on this performance to show that it affects our entire bodies, right? I think like with different hand gestures or different expressions, when you talk about things that make invisibility happen, like political systems, that take the person out of, like if you're talking about Alan Turing, he was well loved, this science-minded guy that they wanted, and then they realized,
he cracked the code, he stopped the Nazis.
Yeah, yet he was then made, what is that word I'm trying to think of? Like made other, but not other, like made like insignificant in a sense. Like
they're like, you did your part, but we're gonna downplay what it is that you had done because you're a liability, basically.
Yeah, and then they thought that he could be a spy, or maybe some horrible things like that, and that comes into the political systems and making people like, it stopped.
Well, Karen was saying she would some politics choose to ignore some specific groups, like when the issue is not directly related to themselves. They deliberately choose to make some part of the society invisible. Wait, what happened?
The camera turned off.
Camera turned off. Now it's just our voices, hopefully.
Let's double check that. Yep, our voices are still being recorded. Alright, so this was an interesting
This makes us invisible.
And now we've gone invisible.
Oh, yay. That is pretty fun. Sorry to just interrupt you, but with Karen, like taking Karen Barad,
Yeah.
like she uses the atom as, in the reading that I did for our class, or that we need to do, it's in a couple of weeks,
Mm-hmm.
which I took notes and then I put them. She's talking about, trying to send it to my email, but I don't know if they'll fully follow. We can cut this out. I'm trying to think of what we can go. Did you want to talk about neoliberalism?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was yeah, sure. What I heard that we're gonna talk about visible and invisible, and the first thing came to my mind was the name. Article about the neoliberalism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because all we discussed in the class about the free labor, I think it's a very good example of visible and invisible in our society now. I mean, the neoliberalism basically values the private work rather than what the classical marketing economic was still. I think it's also actually a little bit related to your topic.
Mm-hmm.
What Karen was talking about, the classical capitalism, and neoliberalism is a sort of like a mild compromise between the classical classical liberalism and the capitalism, I think. So the free one of the problem of the neoliberalism was that free labor was all over the market, because like people's work become unpaid, but they still have to do that to make a life. Their work is still their work sometimes is invisible because they cannot be evaluated like by products or classical labor form, but they still spend time and energy and their thoughts, which is I think represent the invisible, the visible part of the that topic, but in a certain way that's a sad thing, because it exists because there's a reason. I mean, like what we're saying, the idea of visible and invisible are not necessarily against each other. They are basically the same thing, the two facts of the same thing. And I think that's the situation of neoliberalism here. Like the two things exist together to keep things running.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I find it very interesting. Hey, what's
I'm
that?
recording your shoulder. You use your hands sometimes, but your shoulders you use a lot.
Okay.
So I was trying to get your shoulder. Because we have 3 minutes now on my phone. I don't know why. Well, we've gone to 2 minutes, 13 minutes, or 13 seconds, but.
So we talked about this briefly before, but the use of labor as a term,
Yeah.
and its sort of connotation of being directly linked to physicality. We think about labor as something that we produce something. The steel labor, like you make steel beams.
They're still producing. It's just not evaluated in the traditional way.
Yeah, that labor is now sort of this intangible thing, this mind work that we do on computers, and it's all this big sort of, difference that we wouldn't have had in the same sort of way in which Ong was writing.
Okay.
So it's the 90s. And that's an interesting sort of like facilitation of visible and invisible, because like physical labor we can see, it's visible.
Yeah.
It is labor that has a physical form that we can understand.
Yeah.
And labor now in this context of technology is invisible. It's labors of the mind. It's labor that we can't touch and we can't really experience. It's data. So
And the mind work now is greatly underestimated, I think. And I experienced that myself. Like many people around me was like, "Well, design just such an easy thing. You just go and that's it."
Yeah, like you just work for exposure. It's
Yeah,
fine.
exactly. They were like, "I can do that myself too."
But even with research, I'm doing like historical research, or I want to be, trying to find some kind of like volunteering as a docent in a museum, or because I'm in curatorial practice. There's so many places that are asking for free people to work for free and give like the amount of research I've done for free. And that's a lot of work, like really finding the truth in a sense of what you're looking for and you're seeking, knowing where to go for that, but also I want to find the little nugget that's not spoken about, so I
exactly,
and that just I remember, so it was I did the facilitation for that reading, which was Tiziana Terranova, and just how shocking it is that was also written in the 90s, but now we're in 2015 and there's less and less paying jobs for people.
And
it's hard to get a job.
Yeah, and coming back to this idea of like visible and invisible, we look at what the 21st century job market is, and it's mostly portfolio based. It's all of this sort of like work here, work here, work here. You don't really have the relationship in which you can have, 10 years on your CV being like, I worked for this company, this is what I did, here's an understandable amount of work that I have done. It's very much this like intangible, incongruent, like, well, I, did 3 months here working on this type of thing, and then I completely switched gears and I was doing this with this company for 6 months, where it's I guess, I'm trying to think of a way to sort of phrase this. It seems almost like childish. It's not the right word, but like it's inherently devalued because it isn't this long-standing, very visible way in which we would have seen people's jobs work before. It's all of this very new things, and we don't have words for it. So we just sort of have this weird relationship with people not really having steady jobs, where it's like, oh, well, if you look hard enough, if you try hard enough, if you, get the right degree, if you do this type of thing, if you just work this unpaid internship for however long you need to work it, you can live in this visible previous job market that just isn't there anymore.
It's not, and that's where you go, if you go back to renaming and naming, right? And I love that you brought that up, because there's no longer, like, people ask, oh, so what do you do?
I do a lot of things.
I always say that. Well, I've done this, I've done that, I research. I remember I was stopped at the border in Detroit when I was going to volunteer for a festival in the States, and they Googled me, and they went to my website, and they were like, why isn't your job on your website? Because I was working at a hotel. I was working at 5 a.m. at this hotel, and I didn't want it on my resume. I'm like, well, because I don't like my job, right? And they were like, whoa, you do a lot of stuff. Like, yeah, I've done so much, but going to apply for work or having something, like being able to actually work and survive off my labor is almost non-existent now, because I don't have a term. I can't be categorized under a certain career spectrum,
and sort of what you put forward. Like, I remake my CV all the time depending on who's going to be going to my website and what I'm applying for. So whether or not I put that I've done XYZ on my CV this week is different from if I put ABC on my CV next week, because I have such a large breadth of things that I can't put all of them, because then it looks like I'm the most sporadic worker ever, but I also can't put only specific things, because it devalues the fact that I've done other things with my life. And it's like a very complicated relationship that we've started to build with this job market that is so unstable, that there's not really a way in which to be completely visible in it.
Yeah.
You need to curate to a degree that really, I think, devalues so much of the work that actually is being done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I also noticed that sometimes it's very hard to choose to be visible. Like mostly people even they realize the situation, they don't want to fight it, or they just don't want to be considered as aggressive. I'm saying this because I remember once I was taking a course which has like 100 students, and at the end of the one of the classes, the instructor told us to come to front of the classroom and holding a paper in front of us, which is I think it's a Twitter event. I can't remember the exact word I put on paper, but it was something against free student design. So that's the fact that an event should be has to be raised to against that means most students choose not to fight it.
Yeah.
And in a way, they choose to be invisible. I mean, that's what I remember, and I think most people either they don't realize it, or they don't want to be aggressive and they remain invisible.
Yeah, it's sort of the question of whether or not you fight a system that is so oppressive on being visible, or you stay being invisible based on whether or not you just want ease of access, or it's just too much, or you have too much going on.
Yeah.
It's a system that I think is really quite damaging in the way in which it's situated to make people feel like the value of the work that they do isn't real.
Yeah.
The reason for bringing up visibility is the idea of absence. And when I was listening to Karen Barad speak, and then in the seminar there was a professor from U of T by the name of Eric, somewhere on my multiple papers, Eric Kazdem, Cazdym, and he spoke about a project that he did called the blind spot machine.
Okay.
So it was a camera that would show everything, but it was in a grid, so there were four, and then people would move through the scenery, and then in the like spaces, like the black cross kind of spaces, there would be people there, but they would be invisible. But they're still there, and that's how he showed visibility. And does that make sense? So on the screen there was 4 quadrants with black out, and then people would be walking through the landscape or wherever it was, and then they go to different quadrants, but they're still in the scene, but they're invisible. And then I asked him, and I asked what do we think of absence in the idea of invisibility and visibility? And I'm really having difficulty. You brought something up, Alanna, that was really good. But I really want to articulate this because my thesis project is on absent archives and women made absent, and their histories and their stories are gone. They've been destroyed, like they're no longer around.
Good point.
And how to bring this forward is so that's why I wanted to see your ideas too, and that's why I suggested we talk about invisibility, visibility.
I see. Well, I think at some point you were saying the woman archive was like invisible, destroyed. Well, it's the fact that somebody has to choose to destroy it, and who that person is actually a very interesting topic. Sometimes it's the male members of the family, sometimes female themselves, and I think it's a very deep culture problem, like differ from different cultures from one to one. So
It's a big problem. And so when we had spoken about this earlier, what I said absence was the act of not naming something.
Yeah.
So we have all sorts of names for visible and invisible things, and that's sort of what we've been talking about. But what we choose not to make named ultimately renders it invisible. Because if we don't have a way of talking about it, we don't have a way of exploring it. So when we're talking about something like the absence of human bodies or human thought or feminist thought or any of these types of things, it's because they've been chosen not to be named. And that's sort of the interesting thing about what we're doing now, is that we're choosing to name these types of things. So they are becoming visible based on that.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Yeah. Well,
Thanks for listening.
thanks for listening.
Oh yeah, there's no camera.
Nope.